Our story is one of neighbors.
I don't pretend that it's going to be easy.
Don't let your anger turn into hatred. We know that hatred is like a fire. When it's allowed to grow, it will consume everything.
Welcome to Orange Wave, the series discussing progressive news, culture, and all things related to the NDP. I am your host, Will Adams, and across the world, the radical right is waging an all-out war on the LGBTQ community, especially targeting trans folks. Whether it's a distraction from their total failure to actually deliver for people, or because they genuinely believe their hypersexualized rhetoric, it's clear they've chosen trans kids as their battleground. They push this twisted narrative that trans women, even trans girls, are somehow men pretending to be women, labeling them as predators and rapists. And for trans men and boys, they are written off as confused girls or autistic. So not only are they talking over autistic Canadians and co-opting sexual assault as a weapon, but if you even slightly dare question their BS, you're labeled a groomer and written off. This rhetoric isn't just fringe anymore. Sure, parties like the People's Party of Canada prove that these issues get the fringe extremists to throw money at them. But they don't actually bring people to the polls. Unfortunately, that's cutting both ways, which is how transphobia is weaseling its way into our elections. And make no mistake, Poilievre is transphobic. This has been outlined loud and clear. But it's especially toxic at the provincial level, where the push to restrict trans rights actually is impacting people's lives. It kicked off when New Brunswick's Blaine Higgs and Saskatchewan's Scott Moe started pushing some seriously dangerous policy aimed at trans kids in schools. Policies that force schools to out trans youth to their parents, even when those parents might be unsupportive or outright abusive. When they realized how deeply unpopular and just flat out problematic these policies are, what do? They ran for cover behind the notwithstanding clause, using it in a way that's straight up unconstitutional, all to bulldoze these unpopular policies forward in a display of gross abuse of power. Let's be real, most Canadians get it. We know that abusing trans kids isn't a parental right. No amount of gaslighting from Higgs, Moe, or the right-wing establishment media makes that acceptable. But despite knowing how deeply wrong they are, they've doubled down. They've gone from defending an indefensible policy to pushing this narrative that teachers looking out for their students' best interests is somehow wrong. They're framing it like it's about protecting parents when it's really about hurting kids. They can twist it however they'd like, but Canadians aren't buying it. We see through the hate and the spin. And despite that, some who are currently elected other than these two are going to try it anyways. Now, although provinces like Manitoba and British Columbia have overwhelmingly rejected these policies, one province that unfortunately has not been safe from identity politics is Alberta. Whether it be joining an event comprised of people like Tucker Carlson and Jordan Peterson, endorsing in the toxic rhetoric that these two men spread to their young, impressionable, often male audience. But if you ask Danielle Smith at one of her rallies or at a press conference about contrails and if they change the weather, she will actually kind of endorse in that. I mean, it's crazy, and it speaks to the Americanization of Canadian politics in the worst way possible. Alberta pays some of the highest gas prices in all of Canada, and Danielle Smith would rather focus on, posing in images claiming that she's going to unban plastic straws, and she would rather indulge in baseless conspiracy theories so that way she has an excuse not to do anything productive. But we're not here to talk about her indulging in conspiracy theories about the supposed chemtrail problem because, that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about gender identity and how Danielle Smith feels that these things should be handled. Spoiler alert, her plan sucks. On October 1st, 2024, Danielle Smith published a tweet to her X page that reads the following. In less than a month, our UCP government will introduce critical legislation to ensure that children wait until adulthood before making decisions to physically alter their bodies for gender transition. We will also strengthen parental rights within our education system regarding this issue, and ensure that women and girls can compete in female-only sports divisions. While these are sensitive topics, our government believes these measures are in the best interests of children, and we will proceed with these changes without delay. As this legislation is debated, we invite all Albertans to join the conversation. Regardless of differing opinions, we must ensure that all children identifying as transgender know they are cared for and supported. Now, when I read that out, I'm sure you noticed very specific language. Things like parental rights and children identifying as transgender. If you were listening, you probably noticed how Danielle Smith worded that, but I'm actually going to wait to bring that up until we actually, listen to the video that is on this tweet and I, break it down. State my opinion on it. One thing I will say, though, is, as a general rule, not everyone is qualified to have a seat at the table. Obviously, everyone in this country, not just in Alberta, but in this country, everyone is entitled to their own opinions. I do not care if people agree or disagree with me on really any topic, including this one. But when you shove it down other people's throats, that's when it becomes a problem. And that is exactly what this movement is doing, but we'll get to that in a minute. Let's say hypothetically, in a scenario involving healthcare, should we be giving people who believe healing crystals work? Should we be giving them a seat at the table?
My fellow Albertans, I wish to speak with you about an issue that is deeply personal and sensitive to so many. The journey of children and youth in our province who identify as transgender and who are struggling with gender dysphoria. As you may know, after announcing our government's new policy direction on these issues earlier this year, we engaged in extensive consultations with parents, educators, healthcare professionals, sporting organizations, and members of the transgender community.
Okay, name one LGBTQ rights organization. Name one trans person. Name just one person in that field that you spoke to, that you both came to the conclusion that this was a good policy, and who has publicly endorsed your policy. Just one. Name one, and I will unpublish this, and I will retract and make an apology. Yeah, I'm not going to hold my breath on that. You didn't talk to any trans people, did you, Danielle?
We are now prepared to introduce the legislation implementing these new policies, and will do so when the legislature is back in session. I want Albertans to know what to expect to see in that proposed legislation. But first, I would like to say a few words to those most affected by it.
Says with the most fake, disingenuous politician smile I've ever seen in my life. Like, seriously, Danielle, you look like Lance Hornsby from The Walking Dead.
Let's play some fucking war!
I also want you to know that I and those who serve with me in our government are bringing in these new rules for only one purpose. We believe it's vitally important to preserve the time you have as a youth to gain sufficient amount of knowledge, experience, and perspective so that you can fully understand who you are, who you want to be, and what opportunities you may want to have as an adult before making permanent life-altering decisions related to your body. That is so very important to understand. And anyone who claims that these rules were designed to target or somehow harm you in any way are mistaken.
A government person or administration looking to uplift trans kids would not put them into outgroups. They would not put cis and trans kids into outgroups and put them into a different category to try and divide them. Also, that whole last part where Danielle Smith addresses potential trans youth watching this and says that they're loved and she will help them during this time of what she described as self-discovery. Let's say hypothetically that the party was not conservative and it was liberal. Let's say hypothetically this was Justin Trudeau. If Justin Trudeau addressed children in this video like that, when parents would potentially not want them to see that, Justin Trudeau would be labeled a groomer. And I know that because on Mother's Day, he ended up doing exactly that in a news video, and, the radical right labeled him, the radical right threw a fit about the fact that he was doing that, showing an out of context video. And, I don't bring that up in bad faith or anything. I would not do that because that's disingenuous and it makes your argument look terrible. But why is it unifying when Danielle Smith does it in this context, but when Justin Trudeau does it, addressing kids, telling them to get their parental units a present for insert parental unit day here. Why is that considered inappropriate?
Although questioning or disagreeing with these new policies is any person's democratic right, adults who choose to tell children and youth that these policies were designed to hurt them or marginalize them, that kind of rhetoric is irresponsible and harmful to the young people involved, and it is entirely false. I sincerely hope that we adults can debate the proposed legislation with maturity and compassion, rather than question each other's motives at the expense of the children and youth who will be listening to the debate.
Think of the children. Won't somebody please think of the children?
I want to address everything and break down everything as it's brought up, so I'm going to leave this part till the very end because addressing it after addressing everything else makes my case stronger. But what I will say now is this right here is an emotionally deceptive tactic to try and get rid of any criticism. It's trying to guilt trip people into believing that if you criticize her policy, that it's irresponsible and that you're spreading rhetoric. And then there just so happens to be the part of this where she's treating hypothetical trans kids who are watching this, because she knows that they're going to be watching this in some capacity because social media is a thing. And, you know, every kid in between the ages of 13 to 17, hell, kids younger than that have smartphones. So she knows that kids who are affected by this policy are going to see it. And she's talking down to them like they're idiots. You know, patronizing people is not the greatest way to, you know, what was it you said? That's not the greatest way to say that you are uplifting them. Just saying.
Firstly, licensed Alberta doctors will be prohibited from performing gender assignment surgeries on youth under the age of 18 in Alberta.
Okay, this right here already gives us a lot to work with. First of all, she does not define what a gender reassignment surgery is. There is really no explanation as to what that looks like and what specific treatments that will be stopped. She could either be talking about top surgery or bottom surgery. Let's go over what she could be talking about. Bottom surgery does not happen in Canada if you're under the age of 18. That just simply is not something that is possible. And for top surgery, that does not happen except for in very specific circumstances. They do not just give them out. Danielle Smith, before she published this video, because she's been talking about this since January, she was actually asked, by a reporter, how many trans youth have actually gotten top surgeries in Alberta? And she actually said that she doesn't know, which should tell you that this is a non-issue and she's doing it to, on one end, fear foster, and on the other end, she's doing it to restrict some kids from having the right to feel comfortable in their body, which doesn't sound like uplifting them to me. It sounds like oppression. It sounds like, you know, it sounds not very good.
Puberty blockers and hormone therapies for the purpose of gender reassignment for minors under the age of 16 will also be prohibited unless a minor has already commenced their treatment at this time. For 16 and 17-year-olds wishing to proceed with puberty blockers or other hormone therapies for the purpose of gender reassignment, they may do so only if they have parental, psychologist, and doctor approval.
Pushing to ban puberty blockers for people under the age of 17 is proof alone that Smith never talked to a single trans person while making this law. Puberty blockers are typically given out when the kid is in between the ages of 11 and 13. They do it with the intent of seeing if it stops gender dysphoria or lessens it. And if it does, then maybe they'll then do things like hormone replacement therapy. Nevertheless, puberty blockers are also reversible, and Danielle Smith is banning them. Gender-affirming care is life-saving. Make no mistake of that. Study after study after study proves as such. Danielle Smith doing this in such a reckless fashion risks a mental health crisis for trans youth.
Schools, the proposed legislation will now require parental notification and consent for a teacher or staff member to change a child's name or pronoun and publicly use that new name or pronoun in a classroom setting or school assembly. And to be clear, this does not mean reporting or outing a student for their private conversations with friends or teachers regarding their gender identity. For 16 or 17-year-olds who choose to alter their name or pronoun used in school, they may do so without parental consent, so long as parents are still notified in advance. In those extremely rare circumstances where a teacher feels that a child might be at risk should the parents be notified of a desired name or pronoun change, Alberta Education will provide a protocol to ensure the protection of that child throughout the parental notification process.
Okay, this is the part where the parental rights rhetoric starts. This statement just plainly contradicts itself. requiring students under the age of 16 to have a parental opt-in basically makes it so that way those students either have to out themselves, which is just plainly irresponsible, or it leads to them being forced to stay in the closet. And seriously, you mean to tell me that 16 and 17-year-olds in Alberta can drive and be charged as adults, but they can't identify under a name that makes them feel comfortable without the consent of their parents? Are you kidding me?
That is the most illogical attitude.
Also, I think there's a valid question to be asked here. What is a parental right? Why do these people never define what that means and what they think that means in practice? Parental rights only comes up once in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom. Just once, and it's in the context of them sending their kids to schools that teach both English and French. That's it, nothing else. I mean, none of what Danielle Smith has actually described is a parental right, not only in the legal definition federally, but also just on paper. That is not a parental right. Parents are entitled to know exactly what their kids are willing to tell them, and that's it. If a kid feels unsafe telling their parents something about themselves, especially in this context, the question should not be whether the kid's indoctrinated. The question should be, why does that kid feel unsafe to talk to their parents? Because if their parents were fostering good, healthy relationships with their kids and were not bigots, then their parents would be the ones who they'd come to first, right? I mean, this is coming from someone who is not trans but has met several trans people. The only ones who hide it from their families are the ones who have families that will outcast them or abuse them or treat them like garbage to try and convert them back to being cisgender, in quotations, because, you can't convert someone back to being cisgender. That's not how that works. So basically, my opinion on that is if you don't want your kids to hide things from you, don't force the teachers to out them. Instead, don't give your kids a reason to hide shit from you. And I'm just going to be so curious about if someone puts together that this, technically speaking, violates charter rights to freedom of expression, because yes, trans youth have the right to freedom of expression under the charter, even if they are not adults, and a part of that right would fundamentally just on paper be the right to go by a different name and pronouns than what appears on their birth certificate.
I am convinced that parents, even those who may disagree with the decision of their child, will still love and care for that child no matter what choices they make. It would be wise for all of us to remember that, rather than questioning the love of parents and their paramount role as the primary caregivers and teachers of their children.
This is another example of Danielle Smith telling on herself and revealing that she, in fact, did not talk to any trans people about this law. I think this poses another great question. What exactly does disagreeing with your child's opinion in this context actually mean? Oftentimes in this context, it might actually equate to something that would be considered to be child abuse. Whether it be physical forms of abuse like beating your kid or denying them access to food and other necessities, or if it be emotional abuse, things like deliberately using your kid's dead name like on purpose and, going out of your way to deliberately hurt your kid emotionally, that's still child abuse. It's not a parental right to do that. Danielle Smith giving these vague anecdotal answers makes it so that way she does not have to confront the fact that this is a very real reality for trans kids who are outed against their will. Almost 50% of all homeless youth in Canada are members of the LGBTQ community. And despite that, it's not even addressed here, which yet again proves that Danielle Smith did not actually talk to trans people.
In addition, the newly proposed legislation will require parental notification and a parental opt-in requirement for each instance a teacher intends to address issues or subject matter involving gender identity, sexual orientation, or human sexuality. Furthermore, the provision of resource materials or presentations to students related to these subjects in our K-12 schools must be approved by the Ministry of Education to ensure age appropriateness and relevance to school curriculum.
Parents can already read the curriculum if they want to, and if they don't like what the public school curriculum is telling their kids, they could send them to Catholic school if they want to send them to a school that's, more in line with their religious beliefs. And if that's still just not good enough or they're not religious, then they always have the option of homeschooling or private schooling out of their own family budget. The public school system, whether it be in Alberta or Ontario or any other province, should not have to dance around The public school system should not have to dance around parents who watch too much Fox News and go to the PTA meetings every once in a while. Since we've actually seen a rise in parents going to the PTA meetings and claiming that because the book has LGBTQ people in it, that makes it inappropriate for their kids. We should change it and make it so that way if you want to get a book banned, you need to cite a very specific reason, and that if it's something like that, your complaint is automatically thrown in the garbage, because we as a society should not have to dance around things and pretend things don't exist just because Jordan Peterson told someone that it's immoral or it's a sin.
And finally, as it pertains to women and girls in competitive sports, proposed legislation will be tabled that prohibits individuals born biologically male from competing against women and girls in competitive sporting competitions. This will apply to all competitive women's and girls' sports in all provincial sporting organizations, as well as in our schools and post-secondary competitive sporting divisions. Obviously, this prohibition will not apply to recreational or co-ed divisions. And our government will support the formation of additional co-ed and recreational divisions so that all athletes have as many opportunities as possible to compete in their sport of choice.
I'll give Danielle Smith this, even though I think she's lying about it. I do believe that co-ed divisions should be expanded. I will give her that. That's a good idea. As for everything else she said, there she goes again, putting people into out-groups. So what Danielle Smith is doing here is she's not allowing trans youth to medically transition, but at the same time, she is also making policy that stigmatizes social transition. You know, just look at the language she used to describe trans women and girls compared to cisgender women and girls. With the language she used, calling cisgender women women and girls, but calling trans women and girls biological males, she is trying to put the image of a cisgender man in your head dominating in the women's sports league. That's exactly what they do when they use that type of wording. It's deceitful, and, you know, this kind of policy, this isn't uplifting anyone. This is going to create a mental health crisis for a chunk of Alberta's youth because Danielle Smith is desperate to cling to power and get the support of her more far-right supporters.
In closing, I again sincerely ask that as we discuss and debate this proposed legislation, both before and after it is tabled, that we do all we can to depoliticize the discussion and focus on the well-being of the children and youth most affected by these policies. They each need to know that although adults may strenuously disagree on what policies are in a child's best interest, each of us loves and supports them in becoming the person they want to be regardless, and will be there for them if they ever want to talk or need our support. That commitment and care by all of us for these children and youth should not be questioned by either side of a political debate.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
Okay, great news. I don't have to replay the clip because Danielle Smith revisited what I was going to touch on. Danielle Smith is othering trans kids. She is putting them on full blast and is endangering their right to safety. She's taking away their right to bodily autonomy, and she is framing it in such a way that any criticism faced towards her is disingenuous, is emotionally manipulative, and harms these kids. Danielle Smith making an appeal to emotion fallacy does not change the fact that these laws are inherently harmful. No amount of mental gymnastics will change the fact that this law is not based in any scientific reality, but is rather based on an emotional, feelings-based way of thinking, one that targets one of the most vulnerable populations in this country. There is no good faith debate when the person who's saying that there needs to be good faith debate is automatically just entering it in bad faith and is spreading misinformation. Danielle Smith believes that any content even slightly critical of this law is in bad faith and needs to be depoliticized, as she put it. She's basically telling her supporters that if anyone criticizes this law, that you should just tune them out and not listen. Unfortunately, this very extreme, immature branch of conservatism from the States is gaining a lot of influence here, and stuff like this shows. People like Pierre Poilievre and Maxime Bernier are proof that that is a real problem right now. And it's leading to this even bigger problem where people like Danielle Smith, in the leadership position, would rather stoke hatred and division among the population rather than dealing with issues that actually affect most people. In British Columbia, John Rustad actually proved that just campaigning on the idea that abusing trans kids is a parental right, that proves that unless you're already elected, if you just run your campaign like that, the overwhelming majority will not vote for you because, well, just simply put, it's out of touch and it doesn't address what they care about. At the end of the day, this all ends when people demand that it ends. Although Danielle Smith is very popular within her own party's support base, that does not mean she is popular with everyone else. Students who are against this should stage mass walkouts. They should lie to their teachers and claim that they are gender diverse so that way they can provide cover for their friends who are actually gender diverse. Teachers who are against this should just draw the line and not comply. They should tell the Smith government that I will not comply. In a situation like this, the notwithstanding clause will only take you so far. Look at the times Doug Ford in Ontario tried to use the notwithstanding clause against the teachers. He lost every single time because they did not comply. For those listening at home who find this concerning, I get it. It is concerning. This is something that people should take note of. But if you lose hope, you're letting them win. Joining advocacy group and getting enough people on your side to stage mass protests will help us win. Advocating for policy that mandates the abuse and sexualization of trans kids is not a policy winner. Danielle Smith will not die on this hill if she is forced to make a decision. So to everyone who is against it, fight like hell. Until then, stay woke, stay sharp, keep questioning everything. And thank you for listening to this episode of Orange Wave. As always, I am your host, Will Adams, and I will catch you in the next one.